My name's John O'Malley. I was the secretary of the Motorway Development Trust, and I first came to the Ladbroke Grove area in 1965, and I was part of a group that arose out of the campaign for nuclear disarmament, and we had done various activities around the country, and we decided that we wanted to go to a single area and work with the community on a range of issues. And we came and we were given a house in North Kensington, and a group of us went there in the summer of 1965. The housing conditions were appalling. There was a lot of private rented accommodation. It looked as if the people who were housed by the council in council housing were by far better off than the people in the streets about where we lived. And the conditions were incredibly bad, and the council was inactive in dealing with them. There was a myth at the time that if people didn't like living in North Kensington, I think the leader of the council once said that they can go and live in Hammersmith. And it was that kind of attitude that the people were poorly housed, poorly educated, and not really wanted in a rich borough. It was a mixed area, low income. There were lots of children, and there was a lot of overcrowding in housing conditions. I mean, some people had jobs, some people didn't have jobs. When we arrived, the houses had been demolished, and it was an open space. I mean, in the summer of 1965, there was this open space that ran around this curve right the way through the area, and nothing apparently constructively to do about it. There was this enormous engineering project, but no benefits for the people who lived there. Well, it was a group set up to facilitate community action, and we did a range of things. We encouraged, we did a housing survey. We did a very detailed and comprehensive housing survey. We started playgrounds in the summer months first, and we tried to establish a law centre. We succeeded in establishing a law centre, and a range of other activities which arose from people's own energies in the community. We were always a small group. Well, in that summer, a group called the London Free School had said the space is there, children need somewhere to play, and had facilitated a venture playground. And after that summer, a group of us met together and thought, I think firstly we thought nothing more than we wanted to make sure that playground remained part of the scheme. And then over a series of meetings, this happens like this, the group of us, it was about no more than 8 or 10 of us, arrived at the conclusion that if we're going to campaign for a little bit of space for a playground, we might as well campaign for the whole space. So we set our hot sights up. It was a kind of one of those eureka moments where we found we could do. It would cost us as much time to go for the whole space, 23 acres, than a single playground. So that's what we did. This was as the flyover was being built. It was built in sections, which they happened to do. They had pre-organised structures, and they pushed them out like a bridge, and it was a major project. So it was I think one of the first things we did was to take a panoramic photograph of the open space, but the motorway was definitely under conscription. People have been cleared out from the site. They're very far from the site. There were quite a lot of housing which ended up within feet of the final structure, but the housing had been demolished, and people had been moved out and moved on, but most of the concerns, there were separate concerns in our lives. It wasn't just the recreation space; it was also the fact that the housing was poor, and people's conditions were bad, and we took up a major thing. We used to go to rent tribunals, we used to take part in planning meetings. We put pressure on the Notting Hill Housing Trust to do more to buy houses in which people lived, and a whole range of issues. My recollection is poor, but it was empty in '65, and I think, I'm not sure when the opening was, 70, 71. So it was. I mean, for an engineering project, it was relatively quick. It was about 4 years, but the damage, I think, was done in the clearance. That I never knew how many people had been moved out of the community. It's only the people who were left who were there and under discussion. I wasn't invited. I went with a group of people from a street near the roundabout, and they decided that their voice should be heard, and their greengrocer's lorry and accompaniment went down the upslip road and advanced on the opening party. So yes, I was present, but I may have missed some of the speeches. The opening was a political event. It was Michael Heseltine. The disruption was shown around the world on TV and caused a great deal of consternation from the government because they'd made them look bad. And over that weekend, they decided to clear Acklam Road and the space near the roundabout. Instantly, a decision was taken within days because people were just pointing out how close the pollution, the noise was going to be to the remaining houses. They have their ways of rehousing, which is not always everybody gets what they should have, but the two parts were because there was talk about them taking legal action against the authorities. This was not nice. This was a government approved of scheme. It was almost a vanity project. This elevated motorway over over North Kensington. I don't think the government had thought at all about the impact it would have on the community. Well, the Motorway Development Trust, which ran for many years, took up the cudgels, consulted with local interests, local groups and so on, and pushed for a constructive use. And I think the core to this is that for us, the opponents were the planners who hadn't thought of anything to do with the local community, but also Kensington Council, who wriggled not to put funding into amenities which were much needed. It was Kensington as a place devoid of open space, but the interest that they had was much more in devising schemes which could milk the charitable sector for funding, rather than to put together a scheme which would be of obvious immediate benefit. Well, I think you know that the consultations we had produced a long list of things, of which the only one we took issues with was the clergyman who wanted a small bore rifle range under the motorway. And we didn't find it possible to include that in schemes that we put forward to the authorities. But the direction that we took was to, if it's needed, put it in. And we got this map of which was shown at the motor show, which showed a range of things which everybody thought they were good ideas. We didn't have much contest about the content of what we needed, and that was everything from day nurseries to opportunities for sport, to various places of space as needed. One of the first things was a hall which turned into a nightclub. Was just there is a shortage of places where people can meet at a reasonable cost. So that wasn't the problem. Our battles were almost entirely to do with dealing with the Scrooges in the town hall, and the tricks which I learnt an awful lot about just how devious, and I mean this is shown in Grenfell and so on, is the council can be to prevent spending taxpayers' money on those in need. We took the spaces as they were designed, and they are, I mean, the way it's a kind of box shape, and they could be linked, but they were quite. We had no chance to involve or get anybody involved in the planning of what was underneath. But the central issue for us was that nobody had considered what should be in the space. And so our thing was very much to pursue that. And we found ourselves in a situation where the authorities told us that it was all dried and dusted. And it slowly emerged that although architects were working and engineers were working to a plan which said car parks, that they hadn't in fact worked that out at all. There's a technical problem. If you've got a motorway 20 foot up in the air, then nobody had considered that what happened on the 20 foot down on the ground level. So we pursued this issue until we had a magic moment where a recent elected member of the GLC, said he couldn't remember that they'd given themselves planning permission to car parks. And he rang up, as crusty people do, and the committee clerk, and said, could you get the papers out? I'm coming up to see them. And then there was a pause, and he got a phone call back, and they said, it's a man called Donald Chesworth. They said, Mr. Chesworth, don't bother to come. We never had permission. And then all kinds of doors that had been slammed shut were opened. And we got a playground immediately. We got space and expensively fenced off so it could be run in that summer. And all of a sudden, the local authority, I say caved in, I'd say they caved in and agreed to a joint scheme. And I think then we had something like 2 years of nasty discussions with the Borough Council about how the scheme could be run, because their concern is primarily that they should control it. And I say control it, they wanted a committee, they wanted the town clerk to be the secretary, they wanted the borough treasurer to be the treasurer, and they wanted control over what was done, and to be as close to independence as they could. And so that was what the fight was about. It wasn't about lovely facilities for people in need. It was about nasty local politics, and an incredibly mean streak in our local authority, who would do anything than cede any responsibility to the people who actually lived in their area. The site wasn't handed back until the end of that time. It wasn't the playground. Odd playgrounds were used, and there was a scheme for building I think there were 3 playgrounds in the time before the thing, but we didn't have access to the land until the North Kensington Westway Trust was set up. The committee, the point was who controls it, and there was a committee set up, and there was a wrangle about who should sit on the committee. There was a further wrangle about who should chair the committee. There was a third wrangle when the chair of the committee gave up after a year. I suspect he washed his hands of it. This was Sir Patrick Riley. And the council were incredibly stupid and said, a person who had agreed to do it, who was Dame Jennifer Jenkins, who is well known in her own right as well as being the wife of Roy Jenkins, they said she was tainted. She wouldn't be independent because she was associated with a Labour politician. And at that point, we realised that this opens the door to ridicule, because you couldn't have a more establishment face than Jennifer Jenkins. So they conceded that she could be the chair, so we had to put together a committee, and we had the same sort of going about which groups from the locality could be involved. The council wanted respectables. I think the phrase was they wanted only groups that could guarantee they'd be there in 100 years' time, which is a hard test in community politics, and so on. And so, I mean, Adam and I were eventually elected by local groups to serve, and I would say we had frequent meetings involving community interest, and we always had the support, and we didn't have any. It wasn't controversial, the proposals that we were putting forward, but the battle was, and had to be the figurehead, was to get the council to agree the thing. And I ended up, after the first chair went, as the co-chair with the deputy leader of the council, and they responded to that by refusing to hold a meeting. So I was the chair who never chaired a meeting. Well, the trust has dirty beginnings, and they know that, I think. They couldn't be called the Motorway Development Trust because we had that. That's why it's called the North Kensington Amenity Trust. It was a balance between, there were the independent chair, and then I think there were, was it 5 or 6 on each side, council nominees and local group nominees. And in the end, although there was only one of the community groups, as it were, was approved of by the council, one of the social welfare groups, and the others were subject to election by all the groups. I mean, and everybody agreed they'd put forward their nominations from after there'd been a widespread consultation and discussion. And as happens in groups like that, these were quite torrid times before the committee itself took shape. Early things, there was a playground close to Portobello Road, which was the 3rd playground I think set up, and then there was a hall built, which became a music venue, and those things people organised around. We got involved in planning issues around the Portobello Green area, and Adam and I spent a long time trying to chase supermarkets, because they were looking for expansion spaces, and so the Portobello Green area was, in many ways, in people's eyes, a potential earner for the area and benefit for the area. Never came about, then so it slowly got underway, and a director was appointed, and in a way, but under-resourced. I mean, the whole story is that at the beginning it was very under-resourced. People had to find schemes, had to find money, so there was no overall strategic sense that you had a 3, 5, 10-year plan to work on. I think Anthony was buffeted by the interests in the area. I think he was genuinely surprised and shocked at the animosity and hostility between the council and the and people who would like things. I mean, most of the group, you wanted to have a playgroup or a nursery, which was one of the big success projects was the Westway nursery, and to find that constructive schemes like that are the subject of scraps, I think it brought him down in that sense, and he wasn't able to change the board situation where the council didn't want a strategic plan, and so people got going what they could get going. It was towards the roundabout, and it was one of 2 schemes that had been generated from playgroups. The idea was that the area didn't need preschool playgroups, didn't need 2.5 hours in a church hall for children. People wanted daycare, and there was this is terrible history. The AMF International is a company that was trying to put parking meters in the area, and they gave money for a worker and advanced the idea that what you wanted was proper daycare. And so the schools and the providers had two centres, one in Colville Square and the other was this new built one there, and that was for a number of years one of the few places where anybody in an area could get a daycare place, and it was innovatory in its time, and they've both gone the way of cuts, I think, but they were schemes, and they were schemes of the area. They weren't motorway schemes. They were schemes of the area, and the Housing Trust gave the Colville Square one space and support, and the money was raised to get the one in under Westway established. We got to the stage there where we were concerned about pollution, because again, these are recurrent themes, is that the motorway was chucking out substantial particulates, and we found ourselves looking at abstruse theoretical documents about the damage being done by pollution. Well, I'd like to think that the lessons of the 1970s and 1980s, where if you want something done, you do it yourself, has followed through. The North Kensington seems to resonate over the years. There's no doubt that people were surprised at how coherent the community was after the Grenfell disaster. Those lessons are learnt by, and it's pathetic, but it's constant struggle. You can't rely on the authorities to keep your corner. You've got to shout out for what's needed. Housing has changed. There's been a lot of churn. A lot of people have moved out of the area and moved in. But those are the lessons. We would have said that council housing was something to be aspired to those years, because the private housing was so appalling. But now we seem to recognise that there's a great deal wrong with the housing provided, the council housing. I think because people are they are saying, well, it hasn't quite worked out. There's been a disagreement about the boxing club. The boxing club, the post-Grenfell money raising for the boxing club has raised people's questions about just who the do-gooders are and who the community are. And I think that is a recurrent issue. It's also been the issue about the council's extraordinary reliance on charity, on getting money out of other people, when you can look at comparable local authorities that provide the money directly from the rates to do things that people need to have done. And those are issues which are constant, I'm afraid to say, over the years. Well, I think the response that there has been in recent times to this issue, and about the cladding the cladding requirements, and the fact that you can't do things on the cheap when people's lives are, and it's not just in Kensington, but there's been a block in Southwark and in Lambeth where the health and safety has been ignored or has been changed with the adaptations, and have left people vulnerable. And I think that's changed. I think there's a more recognition that people will get together and sort things out for themselves. Some of the space is being used as I think we would have liked it to have been used. There, because of the proximity to Portobello Green, then the commercial direction has also been there, which I don't think has benefited the immediately surrounding community, but it is still a tourist attraction and so on. But yes, no, I've got lots of friends. I come and see them. I come and look at some of the memorials. So, yeah.